years, I actually have paper. So I feel a little awkward, but there's so much with Abraham's story. Like we said, if you start with chapter 12 in Genesis, and you read all the way through chapter 21, 22 of Genesis, that's all just Abraham's story. Think about that. A lot of people in the scriptures got how much? Their name mentioned. Maybe one line. But Abraham and Sarah get chapters. Why is this? Last week we looked at Abraham, but we looked at the stories that most people don't know. And we looked about the most important one, and that was the covenant that God cut with Abraham. So if you weren't here, just backing up just a little bit, because it's so important. God put Abraham in a deep sleep, and he cut a covenant. He made a vow with him. They said when they would cut a covenant, they would take animals and they cut them in two and make an aisle. And then the lesser party would walk down that aisle, making that covenant with the greater party. But this time God did the opposite. He put Abraham into a deep sleep before he could walk the aisle, and God walked the aisle, making the covenant. But this time he said, if your descendants break this covenant, may I be like these slain animals. That was beyond radical. God knew, and he even told Abraham when he put him in sleep, that his descendants would turn their back on him and would be sent to Egypt for 400 years. But then God would bring them back. He knew before he ever walked that covenant that we were going to mess up. We were going to fail. And that a price would have to be made. Hence why Jesus Christ. We're going to see that Jesus just keeps entering throughout the Old Testament. People don't realize that. Hey. The angel of the Lord is God or Christ himself, and they keep popping up throughout the entire Old Testament before he graces us with his physical appearance in the New Testament. So that's kind of where we're at. We said that when God called Abraham, he was how old? Do you remember? He was just young, wasn't he? He was 75 years old. 75 when God called him out of his place where he was at. He was with the Chaldeans and his family. And he was married to Sarai. Now, Sarai was actually, she was his wife, but she was also his half-sister. That seems weird now, but back then there weren't as many people in the area. So they had the same dad, but different moms. So she was his sister, and she was his wife. She was 10 years younger than him. So when God calls Abraham at 75, Sarah was how old? 65, that's right. Now we know that she loved Abraham. We know that there was a major love connection there. Because they had no children. And back then, that was like the most important thing. You needed a child, you needed an heir. And in the pagan world, you needed that because you needed a cupbearer, and that's a whole other sermon, we won't get into that yet. But that's why they had to have a child, and yet they didn't, and Abraham still loved her. Even though she couldn't bear any children. She loved him so much that when a God they didn't know calls him to uproot everything and move, and he had a lot of servants, he had a lot of livestock, this was a massive move, she graciously went with him. So they go and they move, and then you gotta love it. God puts them in the place where they're supposed to be. And shortly after, there is this famine. And now this is where we get into, I think, chapter 12. So there's this massive famine, and Abraham decides that he needs to move his family and all of his flock and everything to Egypt where there's food. I want you to just think about the irony of this. He had just had this deep dream and the sleep with God, who cut a covenant with him, and now God told him that what? His very descendants were going to turn their backs and they would be enslaved in Egypt. And where does he go during the famine? He goes to Egypt. And while he's on the way there, he tells Sarai, he says, now, she is gorgeous. She is drop dead gorgeous. I want you to think about this. She is after now probably about 67 years old and still so gorgeous that Abraham is afraid for his life. And he says, so if anybody asks you, you're my sister. You're not my wife, because otherwise they're going to kill me to take you. And so they come into Egypt, and it's the Pharaoh's men who see her. And they immediately go back and report to Pharaoh just how fine this woman is. How many of you here at 65 real now are feeling really fine? And it says she was, so much so that Pharaoh takes her into his home. He takes her as one of his wives. Given she's still too old to bear children, but she was a possession to be coveted. While she's there, this worked out pretty good, because then Pharaoh gives Abraham a whole bunch of livestock and riches and wealth for giving him his sister. Now this may sound really bad, because I mean, really, as a woman, if your husband said, yeah, no, that's okay, you can take her. But think about it. Women, think about this. She got to have a luxurious spa treatment for how many months? She got to live in the lap of luxury, and her husband got peace and quiet and wealth. It seemed like it was a pretty good deal, actually. But God didn't leave it there. No, 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 no. He actually tells Pharaoh. It says the whole Pharaoh becomes full of serious diseases, and he finds out why. So Pharaoh summons Abram, and he says, what have you done to me? He said, why did you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? So that I took her to be my wife. Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go. Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. Okay, picture that. Pharaoh could have had Abram killed. He could have taken back all that he had given Abram plus everything Abram had, but he didn't. He sent them on his way with even more than what he showed up with. That's the kind of God that we serve. So here they've been uprooted again, and they head back to Israel, and this... Now Lot had gone with Abram at the beginning, his nephew, and he had settled, we looked at last week, over by Sodom. Well, there was a big war. There was 5 kings and 4 kings, and they were fighting over Sodom, and in the process, the one side won, and they took Lot and all of his possessions and took him away. Well, when Abram finds out about this, he gets torqued. Now, Abram was 80-something, and they're 79, 80, when Lot gets taken away. He rounds up his men, and he goes in charging in, and not only does he get Lot back, but he defeats the kings. Let that settle in for just a moment. An 80-year-old taking up a sword and going to fight for his family. And because he does that, he's returning back. And in chapter 13, this is after Abram returned from defeating Calamar, the kings, and the kings allied with him. The king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Sheba, which is the King's Valley. And Kristen and I were there. That's really fun. It's on the far east edge of Israel. That whole thing there is the King's Valley. And it says, then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. And he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hands. Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. You ever wondered why we give a tenth of our offering? It's from here. There is something way more important about this, because we don't know who this Melchizedek is. In fact, if you look at Paul, what Paul says in Hebrews 7:3, he describes him as without father or mother, without genealogy. He has no beginning and no end. He was the high priest, and he was the high king. Who did we just read about in Revelation? What did Jesus say? I am the Alpha, the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the ending. Many, many scholars and high Jewish rabbis believe that this is Jesus incarnate. And what does he show up with? Bread and wine. That's where we get the Eucharist from, even way back in the Old Testament. Besides Jesus there at the table. He was also from Sedek, Salem, which is today Jerusalem. Just let that soak in for just a moment. Jesus, God had appeared to Abram before and cut a covenant. Jesus now appears to him and says, "Blessed are you by the God Most High." Can't you just see maybe Jesus up there going, ooh, let me do it, let me do it, let me do it. God says, who want to go down? Bless him. Also, they think that that's the reason why David made Jerusalem the city capital. Because of this. He knew the Old Testament. Well, we're going to fast forward a little bit, because then now we have Abram, who then settles down, and he says in chapter 16, he says, "Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bore him no children. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, 'The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her.'" It says Abram agreed to what Sarah said. Okay, all this happened after God had already told them that he was going to produce a great nation through Sarah. But how long do you think it transpired here? Was it just a year or two? It was 10 years. Sarah had already been 65. Now she's 75. And she's going, yeah, I'm not thinking this God is going to do anything anytime soon. And I'm too old. There's no way. There is no physical way I can bear you children. There's no physical way that a nation is ever going to come to you through me. But she has a maidservant, Hagar. Where did I say she was from? Egypt. When was she in Egypt? When she was in the Pharaoh's residence. Think about this. When Pharaoh let her go, the very maidservant she had with her while she was in Pharaoh's home is who he sends with Sarai. So for over 10 years, Hagar has served her. And now she says, I'm going to give her to you, Abram. Now, do you see the problem with that right there? Because God says, I'm going to make a nation through you, and now we're bringing in Egyptian culture. Now, does it say that Abraham said, nah, I don't think that's a good idea? He readily agreed. So, he gets her pregnant, and it says the minute she conceives, she despises Sarah. Ooh, Sarah did not see that coming. And I am sure the emotions of knowing that her maidservant is now pregnant with the very thing that she has wanted her entire life and cannot have, that was a whole new can of emotions that she was not expecting. And so there is a feud and there is a war. And it gets so bad that finally, Sarai says to Abram, you are responsible for this wrong that I am suffering. Oh boy, we don't ever say that, do we? We do something we shouldn't, we know we shouldn't, it goes bad, and then we blame somebody else for our emotional suffering. She says, I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Oh, that was added emphasis, wasn't it? So Abram, as any good man would say, well, the slave girl is in your hands, do with her whatever you want. He just washed his hands of it and walked away. So she just makes things so miserable that finally Hagar runs away. And she runs into the desert and she's crying because she's been so mistreated. And the angel of the Lord found Hagar near the spring in the desert. It was the spring that was beside the road Sur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and why are you going? She says, I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. And the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress. and submit to her. See, who was really in the wrong in the first place? It says Sarai despised her. She made life pretty rough for Sarah, which then vice versa. Then the angel added, he said, because if you do this, I'm going to increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. And the angel of the Lord said to her, you are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son, and you shall name him Ishmael. For the Lord has heard your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man, and his hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. And he will live in hostility towards all of his brothers. She gave his name to the Lord who had spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. Okay, back up right there. Who did I say visited her? The angel of the Lord. And she says, I have now seen the one who sees me. Wow. How many people have thought about that one? So that is why the well was called Bir Laha Roy. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son that she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael. What did God say? He would make a great nation from Ishmael. But he called him what? He said he's going to be, I got to get this exactly right so I don't say it wrong. But he said he's going to be a wild donkey of a man. Says he's not going to get along with anybody and nobody's going to get along with him. Do you know who the entire nation is that comes from Ishmael? Muslim, the Arabs, nations, all of them come from Ishmael. Let that settle for just a moment. If Sarah hadn't taken matters in her own hands, I mean, God would have had a great nation. But that's how that nation came about. Well, we're going to see why there's feuding. Because 13 years now have gone by that Sarai has watched Hagar and Ishmael. And Ishmael has daddy's undivided attention. We see in chapter 19, it says, then God said, there was angels that showed up. And they told Abram, he said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call his name Isaac. I'm sorry, I want to back up to 17. God also said to Abram, as for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her, and will surely give you a son by her, and I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of people will come from her. And Abram fell face down, and he laughed as he said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abram had said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. See, he still loved Ishmael. He was still asking God, don't forget him. Abraham had his name changed. Right here is huge, because what happened to Sarah? God changed her name. Before a name has ever been changed, something massive has to happen either before or it's getting ready to what's going to happen next. I don't know about you, but before God has ever done something big in my life, he always makes me take a break. I have to have a vacation or something to prepare me for whatever's going to happen next. Saul had the encounter with Christ before his name was changed to Paul. Peter had his name changed before God called him to move forward, to share the gospel. So it says, right there, God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son. Now this has been another 13 years. I said 10 years had gone by when she decides to give Hagar to Abram. Now another 13 years goes by. And God keeps saying what? I'm going to make a great nation of you. You gotta really feel for Abram and Sarah at this point, right? Or have you never been in that place where you waited and you waited and you waited, and it seemed like nothing was ever going to happen, and you started watching years tick by, and you feel dried up and has been, and you're like, God has forgotten me, but God keeps telling him, I have not. He says, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant with all of his descendants after that. And inspirational, I've heard you, and I will surely bless him, and I will make him fruitful, and will greatly increase his numbers, and he will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant will be established with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. She was 89 years old. 89 years old. He said, when he had finished speaking with Abram, God went up from him. And they asked, where is your wife Sarah? He says, there in the tent. And one of them said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will bear a son. Now Sarah was listening to this whole conversation in the tent. Abram and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself and thought, after I am worn out, my Lord is old. Will I now have this pleasure? And the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh. But he said, oh, yes, you did laugh. Have you ever read that passage and thought that was really harsh on Sarah? I mean, hello, who wouldn't go? Yeah, I mean, if that had been me and I was like almost 90, told that I'm going to finally have a baby after all this time, I'd be going, yeah, right. I would have been accused of laughing too. Sarah's not the only one in the Bible who was way past childbearing age that couldn't have a child who had a child. Who here can tell me the other one? Elizabeth, John the Baptist's mother. Same thing happens with Rachel. There's Rebecca with Isaac's wife. So Abram moves from that region. Now this is after they told him, in a year your wife's going to have a baby, which means it was just a month or two later she gets pregnant. And shortly after that, now Abram moves to another region of Negev, and he lives there. And then there's another king, Abimelech, that comes in, and he sees Sarah, and he wants her for his wife. And what does Abraham say again? Tell her you're my sister. This didn't happen once, it happened twice that Abraham gives her away to the king. Now the king didn't say, if I don't get you, I'm going to kill anybody in your family. Abraham just does it. But God comes to Abimelech in a dream one night, and he says to them, you are as good as dead, because the woman you have taken, she is a married woman. Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he says, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, she is my sister? And didn't she also say, he is my brother? I've done this with a clear conscience and clean hands. And God said to him in a dream, yes, I know that you did this with a clear conscience. So I've kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. And if you do not return her, may you be sure that you and all who belong to you will die. It just almost seems too much, right? It had happened once before. And now at almost 90, she is still so drop-dead gorgeous at 90 that you have yet another king who wants her. I wonder if Abraham really realized how good he had it. It says, now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he promised. She became pregnant, she bore the son, as God had promised. And Abram gave him the name Isaac. And when he was 8 days old, he was circumcised as the Lord had commanded. And Sarah says, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said that Abraham and Sarah would nurse children, and yet I have borne a son in my old age. That is phenomenal, isn't it? Only God could do this. Only God could make a person wait for it, and then wait for it another decade, and then wait for it another decade, and then say, okay, now. It says the child grew up and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar and the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking him. And she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance of my son Isaac. Now back then they said kids would be weaned anywhere from 2 to 5 years. So we know that Isaac was 3, 4, 5, somewhere in through there. Which means if Ishmael was already 14 when Isaac was born, now he is what? We're talking 17, 18, 19 years old. He's not a little child. And he is mocking him. Why do you think he's mocking him? Because he knows that this is a big deal. And how many times has Dad thrown a celebration for him? So we know that Hagar and Ishmael are taken away and they're put off into the desert, given water and food, and when that runs out, she says the young lad, but again, he's what, 17, 19, under a tree, because she can't bear to see him die. And it's there that the angel meets her and says he's not going to die. He provides water and food and says, go, I'm going to make a great nation. And we kind of think that that's where it all ends. But it doesn't. It really doesn't. And we know that Abraham then what? When Isaac is in his late teens, maybe 20, is when he is called to go and sacrifice him. But God doesn't make him go through. I want you to think about this from Sarah's standpoint. And this is where I want to kind of wrap this up. Sarah is getting very old. She is in her late 120s. I bet still rocking it, looking awesome. She finds out what her husband just about did. Ladies, what would you do? According to my Hebrew instructor, many scholars believe she left Abraham at that point. After everything else that she had put up with, that she had dealt with, she had loved him through, that is drawing the line. And why is it? Because the scriptures actually say that she died in Kerith. That's not where Abraham lived. And it said he went to go mourn her. He didn't go see her before. He went to go mourn her after she died. And it was there that Kerith is actually Hebron that we looked at the pictures of, that we went. And he purchases ground and a cave. That is now the cave of the patriarchs that we looked at the pictures of. And that's where he buried Sarah. People don't realize Sarah was 129 years old when she died. Guess how old Abraham was when he died? 139 years old. He died within that same year that Sarah died. Now, some people say that he had a third wife because they give a name, and actually a lot of the Hebrew scholars say no, that's actually another name for Hagar. Which means, after Sarah died, he brought Hagar back home. Which means Ishmael came home. And how do we know this? Because when Abraham dies, both Isaac and Ishmael are there to bury him beside his wife. with all of that turmoil, with all of that animosity, in the end, there was what? Reconciliation. In the end, God had brought them back together. And in the end, God has kept his promise to make from Isaac a nation so great, greater than the stars in the sky that you could count. But we know from scriptures, that's why there's all this fighting going between Jewish community and the Arabs. It always will. That's what was predicted. Family feuds. So what I want to leave you with is just ponder a little bit. I know there's so much there in the story, but that's why I want you to go back and read it for yourself. See what else you can pick out. I had to just pick and choose. But ultimately, we can relate, can't we? When things don't go the way we want it to, in the time frame we want it to, we will usually take matters in our own hands. And the very thing that we thought we wanted so bad, when we actually got it, we realized in a quick hurry that's not what we wanted, or it did not go the way we saw it going, or it didn't turn out as we had hoped. There's also the love. The dedicated love between a man and a wife who stood a lot of years, a lot of decades, through a lot of turmoil, through a lot of heartaches, a lot of dashed hopes at the time because they didn't see what was coming. A love that withstood not giving up his wife once but twice and getting her back. A love between a man and a wife who was still willing to conceive a child when she was 90 years old and he was 100. I don't know what you're dealing with right now. I don't know what you're wrestling with. And maybe you felt like you've been waiting for something for a very, very long time. And maybe God even put it on your heart that he would do it. But you're getting really frustrated because you're seeing the clock ticking by and it hasn't happened yet. Just know that you're not alone. And neither is Sarah. Even in the New Testament, we see Elizabeth had to go through the same thing. But God is faithful, and what he says is true and trustworthy, and that is how we can go to sleep at night and rest easy, knowing that we serve a God who is the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end, and as Hagar says, the one who sees me. God sees you. He knows you. He's just asking you to wait for him. Amen.